What's happening in the world of business. I'm joined by Cole Stangler. Hi there, Cole.
Hey, Tom.
Let's begin here in France. A tough result in the regional elections at the weekend. And the president's inner circle talking more and more about putting some major economic reforms back on the table. What's this about?
Yeah, it's about pension reform, so a very controversial, contested issue. Set aside last year, sort of the beginning of 2020 by the government at the beginning of the COVID crisis. Now, whether or not that should be revived ahead of next year's presidential election has been debated for months now. According, though, to French paper Les Echos, those talks now reaching a fever pitch. One proposal gaining traction would see a hike in the earliest possible age at which most French workers can retire from 62 to 64. Among others, it's backed by Economy Minister Bruno Le Maire. Selena Sykes has more.
After being shelved for over a year, Emmanuel Macron's controversial pension reform is back on the table. The idea of increasing the retirement age in France from 62 to 64 is gaining traction, though public opinion remains mixed.
I like my job, so working until I'm 64 isn't an issue.
I'm retiring as soon as I can.
I'm prepared to protest to avoid reaching a point where we're still working at 70.
According to French newspaper Les Echos, the government wants to move fast and put its proposal up for a vote in the coming months. The plan would see a transitional phase over the next few years. People born in 1961 would work for 6 months longer, while those born in 1964 would see their retirement age shoot up by 2 years. A move which could see people back on the streets protesting like the end of 2019 and early 2020, with now under a year to go until the presidential election. Many trade unions are still against the idea of reviving the pension reform.
The president needs to explain to people born in 1961 who should be retiring in 2 or 3 years that they'll be working 6 months longer. For everyone else who's less than 5 years away from retirement, they might be working a year or even 2 years longer.
The government reportedly hopes the reform could save the state €14 billion by 2026 and could be proposed in the social security budget as early as this autumn.
Staying here in France, where President Macron is holding the 4th ever Choose France Summit, an annual gathering with foreign executives in Versailles designed to show off the country's business credentials, but also to encourage firms to announce new investments in France. According to the Élysée, this year's edition features 22 new projects worth some €3.5 billion. Among the highlights, a Chinese firm planning to build a factory in Douai in northern France to supply Renault with batteries for electric cars. In the meantime, German retailer Zalando says it plans to build a logistics center it says will create more than 2,000 new jobs. Let's take a look now at some of the day's trading action. Wall Street, with a pretty muted start to the week, as we're seeing here, COVID concerns weighing on investors. The S&P hanging just around the flat line after a new record setting last week. The tech-heavy NASDAQ, meanwhile, in positive territory there. Shares in the Dow Jones seeing some losses. Bitcoin also proving to be resilient yet again over the weekend. Regulators in the UK moving to ban Binance, that's the world's top cryptocurrency exchange, but Bitcoin investors evidently still into the coin. It's up around $34,000. Next up, e-cigarette giant Juul has agreed to a landmark settlement in the U.S. The company will pay some $40 million to the state of North Carolina after being accused of deceptive marketing practices aimed at young people. While Juul hasn't admitted any wrongdoing, the deal also prohibits it from advertising to anyone in the state under the age of 21. It is the first such settlement Juul has reached with the state government in the U.S., also one applauded by North Carolina's Attorney General. He said it was, quote, holding Juul accountable for its instrumental role in creating a youth vaping epidemic. Now to Thailand, where struggling tuk-tuk drivers have found an unlikely savior. Like in many countries relying on tourism, the drivers have seen their source of income evaporate because of the pandemic. But now K-pop fans have come to their rescue, turning the iconic mini cars into moving billboards for Korean stars. Cameron Ledalek has the story.
These tuk-tuks are the tourist taxi in Bangkok. And so when the pandemic hit, drivers saw their source of income dry up overnight. They say they haven't had help from the government. But now there's light at the end of the tunnel, thanks to an unlikely saviour. K-pop fans, who've started paying drivers to display posters of their favourite idols.
ก่อนที่น้องๆจะมาติดป้ายกับเราเนี่ยมันโควิดรอบแรกมันจะหาเงินแย่มากวันหนึ่งนี่ได้แค่100 กว่าบาท
In 2018, tourism accounted for almost 100 billion euros of GDP, about 1/5 of total economic activity. But in 2020, when tourism disappeared, Thailand's GDP fell by 6.1%, and growth is still expected to be sluggish this year at less than 3%. Tourism workers have been reclassed as essential workers to try to get them vaccinated faster, but hopes of a rapid return to business as usual have been dashed, with only about 6% of the population fully vaccinated, and numbers of new coronavirus cases on the increase. Despite that, the government is pressing ahead with a plan to reopen Phuket to international tourists on the 1st of July, which it hopes will give the country's economy a much-needed boost.
And finally, the world's biggest mobile telecom fair is underway in Barcelona. After taking a year off for the pandemic, the Mobile World Congress is back in a scaled-back form. Attendance is capped at 50,000, and some of the industry's biggest players won't be attending in person. But the four-day event will still include high-profile addresses from people like Elon Musk, while some smaller Chinese firms are using the occasion to unveil new devices. As one executive put it, they're just glad to be back.
We're waiting, expecting something like this because we have one year break, and I think it is very, very nice that we start, even if it will not be very full. It is the best to do, so we can retake a relationship with people. We can know, we can see friends and so on and so forth. And business is taking, even if we have this problem. But I think we will get over. I hope so.
Now, Tom, this is one of the few major trade shows in the world to hold an in-person event this year, and there are some real incentives to do so. The event here in Barcelona typically generates over 450 million euros.
Wow. So some people have been losing out on all of that all the while. Thank you very much indeed. Cole Spangler from the Business Desk. Thank you for bringing us up to speed. I'll be back in just under 4 minutes. Don't go away.